Juliet was part of the first undergraduate showcase that we did 12 years ago, and that was my first year here, so her presentation and the papers of that panel were one of my first introductions to what it is that undergraduates do with their research projects. And so currently, Juliet Carpenter is working as a prospect researcher for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is an international nonprofit with a mission to save wildlife and wild places worldwide through science, conservation action, education, and inspiring people to value nature. So she's now based in Manhattan. And so she's going to speak to us, I hope, to be revealed, but about how it is that her history major and has trained her for the work that she's done in a variety of fields since leaving UCSC. So if you join me in giving a round of applause to Juliet and welcoming her up to the podium.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. So I titled my speech, Following the Money, as a take on that famous line from All the President's Men about the Watergate investigation. I thought it would be like a cute nod to US history, which is what I studied here. But I realize it might imply that I got into what I do for the money. To clarify, while I make a comfortable salary, no one goes into the nonprofit sector for the money. My talk's title, rather, is meant to describe what I do in my job. I'm a prospect researcher for the Wildlife Conservation Society, and my job, very simply, is to research potential funding sources for my employer. So here's an overview of what I'm going to cover today. And I won't be using these slides too much. They'll have some additional context here and there, but I mostly have the slideshow to show you pictures of animals because I work for a wildlife society, and that's why I was invited to show you pictures of animals, I'm sure. So before I get into the specifics of fundraising, prospect research and why I like it, I'll briefly explain how I got there. So I graduated from UC Santa Cruz with a bachelor's degree in history in the spring of 2009. That was the middle of a recession. And, especially in California, jobs were quite scarce. And my economic anxiety led me to consider AmeriCorps. I decided to apply to any posting that seemed interesting across the country and told myself I would take the first AmeriCorps position I was offered. And this is how I ended up as a VISTA volunteer in the fundraising department of Harvesters, which is a regional food bank in Kansas City, Missouri. So at Harvesters, I provided administrative support to many aspects of the fundraising department. I was selected because of my research background. The Harvesters on-staff prospect researcher at the time also had a history degree, and while I learned about the field of prospect research there and some of the basics of the job, I ended up doing very little actual research, and I would not get into working in prospect research professionally for about another 5 years. The main skill I developed at Harvesters was in its fundraising database. I learned how to operate, navigate, and run reports in their donor database. After my year-long service term with AmeriCorps ended, I held 2 other positions in the Kansas City area at nonprofits as a database manager, one at a children's psychiatric facility called Miralac, the other at an art museum, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, which is a wonderful museum if you're ever in the Kansas City area. So I then relocated to Austin and began to work for the University of Texas, also in a database management role. So while I can't draw too many specific connections to my time in database management, to specific skills I learned with my history degree, it was my degree that got me in the door with Harvesters, which cannot be understated. And also, because of my research background, I knew that being an expert of knowing how to access information is an incredibly valuable skill. This is especially true in nonprofits, which often store valuable institutional knowledge about donors, giving, the organization itself, in their donor database, but often lack staff with the training or knowledge to access that information when it's really needed. So while at the University of Texas, after about 5 years into a career in nonprofit fundraising and administration, I transitioned to the university's prospect research team. So I was interested in advancing my career while transitioning to a field more suited for my background in research and more aligned with my interests. There was a reason I majored in history. I enjoy research and writing. So I wanted to incorporate that into my job while staying in an industry I knew well and liked. So to understand the part that prospect research plays in a fundraising team, here's a little overview of a fundraising operation. So within a fundraising department, there are several different positions focused on raising money at different levels from different sources. Here's a very general list. These vary wildly from organization to organization based on its size. So my job is to support those looking to secure a large gift from a small select portfolio of managed individual donors, corporations, and foundations. So, like all industries that revolve around money, nonprofit fundraising, usually called development in our industry, is full of very euphemistic job titles. Gift officer, relationship manager, director of donor relations, corporate officer, these are all titles essentially for the same job in fundraising, which is to ask for money. This job is also at its core sales. To be clear, I would be terrible at this job. And I can't imagine most of us with history degrees picked this major because we saw a future for ourselves in sales. In my role, I do no direct fundraising. They are the money askers, I am the money finder. So here's a good definition of my job. Prospect research is a tool used by nonprofit organizations to uncover the personal backgrounds, wealth markers, the philanthropic motivations of donors and potential donors. This research is used to evaluate a prospect's ability to give, which is known as capacity, and their warmth towards a specific organization, which we call affinity. So capacity and affinity, that's what I'm looking for in measuring. So what constitutes the capacity to be a major donor really varies with the size and budget of an individual organization. It could be the ability to give a gift of $25,000, but some large organizations like the University of Texas, where I used to work, define it as a gift of $100,000 or more. So since we're talking about the kinds of dollars I'm looking for here, I have a brief aside about nonprofits courting high-dollar gifts as a fundraising strategy. So focusing on large gifts is a really efficient use of nonprofit resources, and I'll get into why efficiency is so crucial in this field in a bit. It is also a significant source of dollars for most nonprofits. A very rough industry rule is that about 90% of a nonprofit's raised funds come from about 10% of its donors. That said, as more and more of the world's wealth becomes concentrated into smaller groups of people and families, this means that nonprofits are relying on the world's wealthiest people to support their missions, and there are many problematic implications that come with that. I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I could spend my entire time on this subject, but I won't. I'll just say that for now, this is simply part of the reality of surviving as a nonprofit. I highly recommend this book called Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva, which really dives into this subject and offers amazing insights and solutions. So that's a great resource to learn more about this. Okay, so back to what I do. In my day-to-day job, I do proactive prospecting, which involves providing lists of foundations, corporations, or individuals that, based on my research, I feel are good potential donors for my organization. I also do reactive research, meaning I write detailed profiles on known donors to better prepare a fundraiser for future meetings with those donors. These profiles provide background on the donor, assess the donor's philanthropic interests, and indicate the size of a gift a fundraiser could reasonably ask for based on known assets I've identified. So while my goal is to identify and provide research on those who will be giving my organization a major gift, prospect research is, crucially, also a really reliable way to identify prospects who are very unlikely to give a major gift. So for example, before anyone spends time applying to a grant at a foundation, I can let our foundations team know that after researching the foundation's program and past giving, they only give gifts under $5,000 to the region we were hoping to get funding for. I can save fundraisers that time and effort, and those resources can be directed to more promising prospects. This is of extreme value because at nonprofits, maximizing administrative efficiency is absolutely crucial for two reasons. One, most nonprofits have very tight budgets, and they need to get everything they can out of their limited resources. But two, donors want the highest possible percentage of their money going to organizations and organizations' programs as opposed to its administration. You need to be able to prove to your donors that your organization is doing this. So this causes lots of problems. It's quite problematic because there are actually lots of important things that happen in administration, but I won't really get into that. That's, again, another tangent. What it means is that prospect research is an important tool for efficiently and effectively utilizing the time of frontline fundraisers and reducing administrative overhead, which has become increasingly important to donors. Okay, so who gets into prospect research? The truest answer is that because very few people go to school for fundraising, there's not a great deal of consistency. But the two most common degrees I see in this field are history and library science, which I can tell you makes for some very quiet department happy hours. But it's a growing field that many history majors are finding a home in. So, I'm using research skills I learned here in the history department every single day to do my job. Everything I'm looking at is publicly available information, but knowing where to find it, what's important, and how to present it is a specific skill set and utilizes many things I learned as a history undergraduate. So some of those skills. Efficient and effective writing. For my money, a history degree is one of the best writing degrees out there. Not only did I learn how to research, but I learned how to write persuasively and effectively while communicating a great deal of information. I learned and honed some great writing techniques in this department. I keep my sentences short. I don't use colloquial phrases or sayings in my writing. I always have my research read over by a colleague before I send it. I don't think anyone can effectively proofread their own writing. As a prospect researcher, 90% of my communication with other staff is done through my writing. It's got to be precise, clear, and engaging while delivering important information. Another skill, the ability to expertly summarize. Historians are expert summarizers. In this department, I learned how to analyze a range of primary and secondary sources, identify the crucial pieces of information, and then distill those into a 5-page research paper. As a prospect researcher, I review property records, obituaries, social media profiles, tax documents, annual reports of other nonprofits, and many other sources, and then summarize the relevant information into a 2 to 5 page prospect profile read by our fundraisers. It's a research paper. We just don't call them that because if we did, no one would do them. So next, the skill of knowing when to keep digging, and more crucially, when to stop. In a meeting a few weeks ago, I articulated to some of the fundraisers at WCS one of those paradoxes of research in my job. Sometimes the conclusion it can take the longest to get when conducting a request for research on a prospect is, I just couldn't find anything. That's something I learned here. There are often infinite places and sources you can scour for information, and part of being a good historian, at least in the undergraduate level when you have limited time to research, is knowing when to stop digging. It's a skill that takes practice, and it doesn't guarantee you won't miss something. But being able to evaluate the value of my time against the likelihood I'll be able to find a requested piece of information is vital to my ability to meet deadlines in my job. Research could go on forever. Part of being an effective researcher is knowing when to move on. How to read primary documents. Primary documents can be dry and dense, but they were a core aspect of the work I did here, as well as the work I do now in my job. I learned their importance and how to find and read them as an undergraduate. The primary documents I use in my job now tend to be especially dry. I read lots of tax forms, real estate documents, forms filed to the Securities and Exchange Commission to find things like CEO salaries and bonuses. I read a lot of obituaries. These are often the best way to learn of relationships within a family and the names of people's children, which is something I first learned here conducting research. So how to be a self-motivated time manager. I learned the incredibly practical skill of professional time management here at UCSC. This is something I particularly had to develop when completing an independent study course that resulted in a project I presented at this undergraduate showcase over a decade ago. I created a walking tour brochure of the sites in Upper Campus related to Henry Cowell's lime mine that once occupied this land. This long-term project required many stages and helped me hone my ability to manage a timeline and set my own deadlines. I do this in my role as a prospect researcher daily, and quite frankly, I can't think of a job that doesn't require this skill. It's a crucial takeaway from a college education. And it's almost so obvious I didn't include it on this list, but I did for this reason. I have been asked about my time management skills and my experience balancing multiple deadlines in every single job interview I have ever had. You need to have a good example of your experience with this for job interviews. And when I was first applying for jobs, my work on my walking tour project is what I used in interviews. So that's an abbreviated version of what I do in my job and the skills I use to do it. But I also want to talk about why I do it, the things I really like about what I do. So while fundraising is vital to keeping organizations you care about going, it's often a surprisingly low-pressure field and generally allows for excellent work-life balance, especially my job. There is almost never a prospect research emergency. It would be insincere to say that the kind of research I do is always personally interesting to me. This stuff can get repetitive, and I would be truly content if I never had to write a profile on another hedge fund manager again. But there is stimulating research to be done in this field. I come across engaging stories all the time of eccentric millionaires, complex family dynamics, and the often interesting history of foundations and corporations. Recently, I was researching Dannon Yogurt, a company first based in the Bronx, and learned the origins and original reason for fruit on the bottom yogurt, which was popularized by that company. I talked about it for a week. So the best part of my job, though, is getting to contribute to a mission I truly believe in. And I will end today by talking about some of the things my organization does that make me excited to show up to work every day. So as mentioned before, the Wildlife Conservation Society's mission is to save wildlife and wild places worldwide through science, conservation action, education, and inspiring people to value nature. WCS works to protect nature's strongholds, the planet's most biodiverse, resilient, and intact places, using proven, science-based strategies. WCS protects the entire known range of more than 100 threatened species and millions of square miles across 4 continents in the world's oceans. Notably, WCS directs the world's largest on-the-ground conservation programs for the protection of tigers, gorillas, and elephants. My day-to-day work is generally focused on supporting this international wildlife work. WCS, though, also operates 4 zoos and an aquarium in New York City. I work out of the Bronx Zoo, one of the largest urban zoos in North America, which also serves as the headquarters for WCS and is the best place I have ever gotten to go every day for a job. It is also the subject of a TV show. The Zoo airs on Animal Planet. You can watch it. I'm not in it. So there are many specific stories about conservation work I could share today that make me excited about my job, but what I'm most passionate about right now is our work on intact forests. Intact forests are defined as the least degraded forest ecosystems, and they play a crucial role in protecting biodiversity, water supply, and indigenous livelihoods. Preserving them is also critical to combating climate change. Intact forests store significantly more carbon pollution than degraded forests, and we are losing them rapidly. My organization's goal is to end all intact forest loss by 2030. To achieve this, we are influencing global policy to value intact forests, we are strengthening our scientific case, and we are scaling up direct action for intact forest conservation. In September, WCS released new research adding to existing evidence that demonstrates the significant contributions of indigenous peoples to protecting these vital ecosystems. Much of our direct action focuses on strengthening indigenous management systems of intact forests in recognition of the need to secure the underlying rights for these communities and also the globally significant environmental benefits of their work. I love that I use my degree to support an organization I am passionate about. With the recent growth of prospect research in mid-size and even small nonprofits, lots of new opportunities now exist like this. 15 years ago, nearly all prospect research positions were with universities and hospitals. But now, many more organizations are seeing the value of research in the fundraising department, which means more causes and more places a prospect research job can take you. On the right, you'll see a few organizations that are hiring development researchers right now. I looked this up 2 days ago. The Anti-Defamation League, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Jewish Museum, and several more. And these were just the jobs that I found posted that seemed particularly interesting to me. There are lots of other jobs at boring places like Yale and MIT. If this is something you are interested in, and you want to learn more about it, a great resource is this professional organization, APRA. It used to stand for something and included the phrase prospect research, but like many acronyms now, it has just become a word, so they're not like pigeonholed, I guess. So I hope this was an informative look at a research career you may not have considered or heard about for that matter. But know that this is just one job in one field. This position, research and writing, exists in nearly every industry. And your history degree makes you absolutely qualified to do this. Good luck out there, undergrads, and thank you so much for having me today.